Look again at the menu, so you go up to Add. Again, it looks a little bit intimidating with so many items, but you'll mainly be using just the Mesh menu here with all these objects, lights, everything else will be used from itself. So now to the Mesh menu, and I'll choose the top one, which is the plane. And that adds it right in the center of my scene, where my 3D cursor is. It's a circular outline with white and red chips, and it's selected. If I select something else like the light, then you can't actually see our plane anymore because it's inside my cube. And if I try and select it, it's very difficult because I'm selecting the cube instead. What we can do is come up to the outliner to select it, which makes it a lot easier. The outliner is a window that shows all the objects in the scene, and I'll be talking more about that as we go along. To move the 3D cursor, I can hold down Shift and right click. You know when I add an object, we will add it on the 3D cursor. So back to the Add menu, Mesh, we've already got a plane, we've already got a cube. Circle's a bit strange, so we'll just leave that for now. We'll add the UV sphere. And you can see that's added it to one of my 3D cursors. The positioning of the 3D cursor can be a bit strange when you click and there's no object in front of it. It can be kind of anywhere in that 3D space. But if I move my 3D cursor with Shift right click where the cube is, you can see it sits right on top of that object in the people. So on the sphere here, you can see it on top of the sphere. So just a quick challenge to you. Go up to the Add menu, Meshes, and I want you to add in all the objects you can see here, excluding the ones we've already got in our scene. Make sure you move the 3D cursor each time to only then in a different position. Pause the video, don't go back. So hopefully you've gone okay with that. Now this Add menu here can actually be accessed with a keyboard shortcut. If I move my mouse away and press Shift, it brings up the same menu. Keyboard shortcuts are really useful. They speed up your workflow, and it's really important to try and get used to them. Make sure you move to the Add. So Shift A is the keyboard shortcut for the Add menu. Go to the next one on the list. We've got Nicosphere, and you can see that's where my 3D cursor was on top of my sphere. So I'll shift right click, Shift A to add, Mesh, and then set it up. Shift right click to use my 3D cursor, Shift A to add, Mesh, and then Cone, and again, Shift A to add, Mesh, Torus, with my 3D cursor, Shift A to add, Mesh, Grid, which looks a lot like a plane. With my 3D cursor, Shift A to add, Mesh, and then Monkey. And Shift right click, Shift A to add, Mesh, and we'll add the circle in so you can see what it looks like, and it looks particularly strange. Now the grid is almost the same as the plane. It just has a lot more faces within it, and I'll talk about that in later lectures. So I'm going to select that and delete it by pressing the delete key. And the circle is a bit unusual, so I'm going to also select that and delete it. So hopefully you've gotten okay with that. Just take a moment to delete the grid and the circle if you've added those. Okay, let's talk about movements. If I select any object, let's say the cone, I can use my toolbar across here on the left-hand side viewport to move gizmo, which you can see there, rotate and scale, and a kind of transform, which has movement. Actually, these are a bit awkward, can get in the way, and like I say, it's really important to get used to the keyboard shortcuts, which are very easy to remember, so you don't have to use these at all. Incidentally, if you can't see this menu, press T and bring up the toolbar. It's also found under View, toolbar just here. Let's put it back to its default, which is the select box here, and then show you the keyboard shortcuts. If I tap G, it will grab it. So G to grab, and then I can left click in a different position, so G to grab and left click. I can also press G to grab, and then immediately press X to grab in the X axis, and it's now constrained to the X axis. Now I haven't left clicked, so I can press Y now, which sets the Y axis, and Z for the Z axis. And now when I left click, it will set it into place. I can do the same for rotation. So R is to rotate, and I can rotate now, but it rotates perpendicular to the camera. And perpendicular is kind of in line with the camera. I can then press X for the X axis, Y for the Y axis, and Z for the Z axis. And left click to apply. The last one is S to scale. And if I move my mouse side to side, you can see it scaling. And again, you can press X, Y, Z to constrain those axes. Now I haven't actually left click at any point, so I can actually right click to cancel any of those transforms, be it rotation, scale, or grabbing. So that's how we move, rotate, and scale objects. Now in a moment I'll give you a challenge to move all these objects into a line. But before we do that, let's think about the plane which is trapped inside my cube. If I try to select it, I can't. I can actually box select items, so if I select both by clicking and dragging over both items, the plane is actually selected as well. And I know that because it's in the outliner here to the cube, which is kind of yellow and the plane also in orange. Yellow just means it's the active object, and orange means it's also selected. So if I select all of these by box selecting, and incidentally that's the box select tool up here. We can use things like circle select, so I can draw a circle like this, but that can be a bit awkward, so we'll stick with box. So again, the box select can be like this. And you can see when I box select items like that, one object is the active object, and it's highlighted in yellow, and the others in orange. And that will become important later on. I'll explain more about that in later lectures. Now, what about this plane that's inside? Well, now I can box select both, but I've still got cube. But as I mentioned before, we can select objects in the outliner, which does make it a lot easier. Now I can scale it right up by pressing S, so it can become a form. And in a moment, I'm going to challenge you to put all the objects onto the floor. The easy way to do that is to go to front view with one keyboard, but as soon as I click on an object, I can't see my plane anymore. It's disappeared. That's because it has no depth. But when I go to perspective mode, I can see it again. So what's helpful, if I select my plane and go to front view again with one on my numpad, it's helpful to make sure it's right on the x-axis, on the grid floor that's there. Now, in order to do that, I need to remove any transforms. If you press N on my keyboard, that brings up this menu here. I've got my shortcut keys enabled, so you won't see that. But you'll see it item. And you can see, there's my scale there. I've scaled it up over 9 times. And my location is set to 0. As soon as I press G to grab, you can see that location moving. And I can click and drag across those and press 0 to move it back to the world center. You can also click on one of these numbers and drag side to side to do some movement or scaling there. I'll undo those there. So let's scale my floor 10 times, so it's a nice round number, and make sure it's located in the world center, and it's got no rotation, so it's nice and flat. So just take a moment to catch up with me and make sure your floor is right in the center of the world, and scale it 10 times. Your challenge then is to move all these objects onto the floor and into a line along the x-axis. So that's the red one that you cross here. Remember to use front view and top view because it's much easier to line things up like that. So pause the video. So hopefully you got an idea of that. If we select the cylinder, for example, you go to front view with one on my numpad, I press G to grab, and I move that onto the floor like this. And if whilst in front view, it's a bit easier to grab all my items and move the rest of the floor. And roughly into a line. See, I don't know at the moment they are aligned, and I'll need to do top view for that. We'll get them all right on this axis first, and then press 7 to do the top view, and line like this one. So it's then G to grab. And remember, when I press G to grab, it moves them perpendicular to the camera. Because I'm in top view, and then you can be really precise with this by selecting an object and removing any Y transform. But that can be quite tedious and long-winded, but that is one way of doing it. Just a rough line like this is absolutely fine. So let's see how we're getting on. We've got all our objects nicely in a line. Now you can be really specific about how far you want to move objects or rotate objects. If I take the torus, for example, if we want to rotate that, set it 90 degrees. I press R, X, and at this point I can type in the amount of degrees that I want to rotate it by. So if I type in 90, that will rotate it by the x-axis 90 degrees. And once you've typed in all those commands, you can either press left click or enter to set that into place. The challenge to you then is to rotate the monkey, the cylinder, and the torus so that they are sitting on the floor and at an angle. Pause the video. So I just need to jump into front view now with one on my numpad and G to grab and move that onto the floor. I can also press R then Z to rotate around the Z axis to make it a bit more interesting and acrobatic. Same with the cylinder. Y 90 this time. It could have been X, although it couldn't really have been Z because it wouldn't have really seen any rotation. But that's fine if you rotated it by the Z. I'll press 1 to go to front view, and you can see it sitting on the floor nicely, so that's fine. Let's select the monkey next. I'll come around to perspective view. Let's actually come to this side here, and press there it is. And I'm trying to rotate it so it sits on the floor comfortably. It would be much easier would be if I went to side view with 3, but with the wrong way around. Let's have a quick think. How can you go to the reverse of a view? Well, there's a couple of ways. We can press Control 3, or we could actually use the Cartesian coordinates up here to flip from reverse side view to side view. Now I can press G to grab, move that onto the floor there, and just rotate again. So I can just tap R and rotate it. I could also press R then to move the interesting rotation that way as well. Okay, so well done. You've added several objects. All that's left is to save our scene. In order to do that, go to File, Save As. What's the first time you say it will take you to the Save As screen anyway. You can find all your system files here, your drives here. You can create a new folder here if you need to. So, Introduction section, and I'll call this Lecture Name Objects. And we can save as, and we've saved everything. So make sure you've saved your work when you connect them. In this lecture, we'll look at the different viewport display modes, and we'll look a little bit at render. So here's what we got up to last time. Let's create a bit more space by clearing this file here by pressing A. You can also press the tiny arrow here to open it up again and to clear. So in order to think about adding color, materials, and textures to our objects, we first need to think about how Blender shows us the objects in the viewport and the final render. At the moment, if we go to the top right-hand corner here, the viewport shading options, there's back to Eevee. I want you to move your camera into a nice position where you can see all your objects, move your light into a nice position. And let's create a bit more space by clearing this panel here by pressing A. You can also press the tiny arrow here to open it up again and to clear. So in order to think about color, materials, and textures to our objects, we first need to think about how Blender shows us the objects in the viewport and the final render. For the moment, if we go to the top right-hand corner here, with the viewport shading options, there's 4 of them here, and we're currently in solid mode. You can change this to wireframe on the left. It can be really useful for lining objects up and seeing through objects to the other side, especially when we come to editing our objects, but more about that later. I'll go back to solid mode, and next to the wireframe option, we've also got an X-ray option. So if I select that, we can see through our objects, which can be useful again for selecting parts of the object on the opposite side, but it's a little bit easier to see the objects than it is in wireframe. So both wireframe and X-ray mode can be very useful. I'll turn that off. In solid mode, which is the one we've had so far, you can see some shading of the objects. On the spheres, for example, you can see they're dark around the corner here, and lighter on that side, giving us the illusion of some depth. But everything's very grey, and it's meant to make it easy to model without the distractions of colour. Now, it looks like there's some lighting on these objects, but it's all kind of fake. If I select my light here and press G to grab, you can see that the shadows don't change at all, and its light is having no influence. So the shading of the object, the light and dark spots, is only there to help us see the shape in 3D. So just pause the video here and have a look at wireframe and X-ray mode. Let's go across to the next one, which is called Material Preview Mode. If I select that, all my objects turn white because that's their default color. We do have a bit more shading. The light seems to be coming from this side, and we've got shading on the far side and highlights on this side. So Material Preview Mode is using some form of lighting. Now to see this a bit further, what we're going to do is go across to the Shading Workspace. So at the top here, you have your workspaces. We're in Layout currently. If I click on the Shading Workspace, it gives me a few new windows. With not 3D people, which we're used to, so you can press the middle mouse button to move around that. But it has these extra kind of spheres at the bottom. And you can also see is there's a blurry image in the background. There's in some form of light. It's not Blender. Good. Placed by clearing this to clear. So in order to think about the color, materials, and textures to our objects, we first need to think about how Blender shows us the objects in the and the final render. If we go to the top right-hand corner here, we've got the viewport shading options. There's 4 of them here. And we're currently with solid. We can change this to wireframe on the left. That can be really useful for lining objects up and seeing through objects to the other side, especially when we come to editing our objects, but more about that later. I'll go back to solid mode, and next to the wireframe option, we've also got an X-ray option. So if I select that, we can see through our objects, which can be useful again for selecting parts of the object on the other side, but it's a little bit easier to see the objects than it is in wireframe. So both wireframe and X-ray mode can be very useful. I'll turn that off. In solid mode, which is the one we've had so far, you can see some shading of the objects. On these spheres, for example, you can see they're dark around the corner here and lighter on this side, giving it the illusion of some depth. But everything's very grey, and that's meant to make it easy to model without any distractions of colour. Now, it looks like there's some lighting on these objects, but it's all kind of fake. If I select my light here, press G to add, you can see that the shadows don't change at all, and this light is having no influence. So the shading of the object, the light and dark spots, is only going to help us see the shape in 3D. So just pause the video here and have a look at wireframe and frame mode. Let's go across to the next one, which is called Material Preview Mode. If I select that, all my objects turn white because that's their default color. We do have a bit more shading. Light seems to be coming from this side, and we've got shading from the far side and highlights on this side. So Material Preview Mode is using some form of lighting. Now to see this a bit further, what we're going to do is go across to the shading workspace. So at the top here, you have your workspaces, because that's their default color. We do Preview Mode. If I select that, let's go across to the next one, which is called Material Preview Mode. If I select that, all my objects turn white because that's their default color. We do have a bit more shading. The light seems to be coming from this side, and we've got shading on the far side and highlights on this side. So Material Preview Mode is using some form of lighting. Now to see this a bit further, what we're going to do is go across to the shading workspace. So at the top here, you have your workspaces. We're in layout cabinet. And if you click on the shading workspace, it gives me a few new windows. We've got our 3D viewport, which we're used to. So you can press the middle mouse button to move around that. And it has these extra kind of spheres at the bottom. And what you also see is this sort of blurry image in the background. And you can actually see there's a light spot coming from this side here. If I come into here, you can see that is actually lighting objects. This blurry image is actually, if you look at the sphere down here, an image of a kind of halfway in some woods. It's known as an HDRI, some high range image. And the light parts and dark parts are actually lighting our objects. So it gives a very natural, realistic light. It also takes into account the colour of the light as well. So you can see it's got a sort of green, browny hue, and that is actually affecting our scene to some degree. We've also got 3 other windows with the shader editor at the bottom here. So we use to add materials and texture to our objects. And again, you can change these in the corner here. So one is the shader editor here. We've also got image editor with our browser as well. We've also got our outline up top here. And we'll talk about the properties window in a moment. We'll talk more about adding actual materials in later episodes, but for now I'm going to extend this window out by moving over the middle of these 2 windows where my 3D cursor changes and just dragging that down so we can see it a little bit easier. You can move and adjust all these windows just by hovering over the middle of them and left-clicking and dragging. So this is Material Preview Mode, which you can see up the top right corner here. We're getting some lighting influence from the background. But if I select my light again, which is ready, press G to grab, bring it around, I'm not seeing any influence of the lights. So the next one along is called Render Preview Mode. So I click that. And rendered mode is exactly what you'll see when you render the final scene. If I press G to grab now my light, you can see we're having some influence over our shades. Now's a good time for you to test that out. So you jump across to the shading workspace, go to Render Preview Mode, again here, and select your light and move it around the scene by pressing G to grab. Pause the video and have a go at that. Now, if I jump back to Material Preview Mode, we've got this lovely HDRI. The reason Blender puts that in is to have this very natural lighting, and that can help us when adding materials to our objects so that we can see what they look like with natural lighting. However, in rendered mode, we don't have that HDRI because the user may not want to use an HDRI and just use artificial lights like this. So we need to add one in ourselves. And we'll add one of those in the image. The important thing to understand is that render preview mode will show you exactly what you'll see in the final render. However, there is one exception to that. If you just bring down my underline slightly, so you can see all my objects, and select this two icons at the end here. One is an eye and one is a camera. If I click the eye, it disappears, but my camera is still selected, therefore it will actually appear when I render the scene. It doesn't matter around. So we have viewport visibility with the around here, and render visibility with the camera icon. So just be aware of that when rendering your scene. So what is rendering? Well, let's go to camera view for that. So try and remember the keyboard shortcut to go into camera view. So that's 0 on your numpad, or you can press the camera icon here as well. And this is what you will see when you render your scene. So you do that. So I'll come to render, press render image. The shortcut being F12. And here's our final image. Rendered very fast, and if I move that out of the way slightly, it is exactly the same as this, with a little bit more detail in the shadows. As you can see there, the music less jaggedy, once you can see the view. And notice that Blender renders this in a new window, but we can take our image and save it if we want to. And that's how we take what we see in our scene and turn it into an image. If we want to turn it into an animation or a movie file, then it will render out lots of still images to pick up that movie file. So I'll close this down then. But just as a quick test, press F12, we'll go to the render menu and press render. I'll just test out rendering. You get an idea of that. So pause the video and have a go at that. Don't worry too much about where your camera's pointed. We'll talk about camera movement in a second. Now let's look at the render settings. So on the left side here, we've got render properties. So click on that, and we have two main render engines. At the moment, we're using what's called Eevee, which is a super fast rendering system that's not completely accurate to real life. Whereas if I click on this, the other major one is Cycles, and they're the two you'll mainly use, Eevee and Cycles. If I tick on Cycles, you can see that it gives a sort of grainy image that slowly becomes less noisy as it keeps rendering. If I press my little mouse button to move out camera view, you can see all that grain there. And when I release my mouse, it starts to sort out the image. I'll move it once more, and you can see the sample count over here. It slowly goes up and slowly reveals the image. The speed at which it does that will depend on your device. As you can see down here, I have a fairly powerful CPU inside my computer. So when I move my camera, it renders fairly fast. What's even more effective though, if I change this device to the GPU, and I talked already about how you set up the GPU from the first selection. So if we have a compatible GPU, we can change it here to GPU compute. And now when I move my camera, it renders a lot faster. And you should be able to see that Cycles gives this lovely, realistic look, whereas if we change back to Eevee, shadows are a lot more solid, and the lights look a lot more harsh. And Cycles, and we can actually see the softness of these shadows, and suddenly there's a darkness right in the crevices here where the light can't get in. That's because Cycles is a ray tracing renderer, and it calculates the light by zooming through. You can see our light here. That's due to gravity and rays, and it calculates the rays coming from that, hence ray tracing, and how they can bounce around and affect the shadows. So you can see if I move in here, the light is bouncing off this cube here and making this bit of the shadow of this torus lighter than this bit. Also, when it's bouncing around, so my cone isn't quite on the floor there, when rays of light will get underneath in this crevice here, so it's much darker. In order to calculate all these ray bounces, Cycles takes a lot longer to render. So Cycles is a very realistic looking render engine, whereas Eevee, if I go back to that, is kind of making this realism. But if I move around the viewport, you can see it renders super fast. It's basically almost real time. It takes a brief moment for those shadows to update. In material preview mode, jump back to that. This is using the Eevee render engine. You can see that's why it gives us nice, quick and instant feedback, and that's why we have the option of material preview mode, rendered mode. If we go back to rendered mode and change this to Cycles, which many people do, we can then go to and from material preview mode, which is using Eevee, and into Cycles for our final render. It gives us this nice realistic result. Now, if you have a slow machine, you'll want to be using Eevee for the renders as well. And there's ways we can make this a little bit better and realistic, which we'll talk about later on. But for now, let's go back to camera view with 0 on my notepad. And I'll just quickly show you how you can move your camera into a nice position. So if I press N on my keyboard to bring up my side menu, there's a view option. And the view and view lock, we can have lock camera to view. Make sure that's ticked. And I'll press N to get rid of the panel. Now I can move around the camera as long as I'm in camera view with 0 on the notepad, as if it's a normal viewport, using the same controls, to the wheels to zoom in and out, holding down Shift and middle mouse button to strafe the camera from side to side, just like a normal viewport. So I'll come around to the front here, look at the front, and I know it's the front because it's the negative Y right here, and my monkey is pointing this way. Then I'll move my light to the front as well. So G to grab, move across here. That's a little bit awkward though, because we're perpendicular to the camera. So let's go to top view with 7 on my numpad. G to grab to move the light to the front. So somewhere like here, right to camera view with 0, and it's interesting looking scene like this. And I can press Enter to run my scene, and then sort of frames. I can press image, and save my image, so save as, and I can save it as to single images. You can save it as PNG, which is a good file format to use, and then press save image. You can then close this down, of course, save my scene. So files, save as, I'll change this to Electrify, viewport, and render. Save. So your challenge then is to go to render preview mode and take a look at the difference between Eevee and Cycles. Turning it back to Eevee, I want you to move your camera into a nice position where you can see all your objects, move your light into a nice position also, and render your final image. Once you've done that, make sure you save the work and make it less time. In this lecture, we'll be adding materials to our objects and making colors, and we'll be learning a little bit more about how to improve our renders in Eevee. So here's what we got up to last time. We're still in the shading workspace, and I want to give you a quick challenge of moving all the objects into a column in the middle of our scene, still on top of the floor, and I want you to move the camera so it's a bit closer and zoom in on those objects. You might also want to move the light as well, so it's a little bit closer to the object, perhaps. But that's up to you. Of video and that. Okay, so I press 7 on my numpad. That jumps me out of camera view and into top view. If I stay in camera view with 0 on my numpad and try and move around, then it's going to move my camera. So you can either press 0 to come out of camera view, or a different view will take you out of camera view as well. And 7 is the best view here because I can now position my objects nice and easily. And I won't move down to this axis. So I can select objects, keep around, and just squeeze them into like this. I could even rotate them and squeeze them that bit closer, but it doesn't matter too much. Let's move my light as well, G to grab, move it at the top, that way, towards the objects. But just press G to grab and the Z axis this time, so G and Z to move up a little bit. Well, if I want to see the effects of my light, I need to be in render mode. It's very harsh shadows. We can always change across to cycles, and that's much nicer to look at. It will take a moment to update. So for slower machines especially, and just quicker rendering in general, let's change back to Eevee. So I hope you've gotten okay with that task. Now let's add some colour to our objects. First of all, I'll come down to the bottom, into my two windows when my cursor changes, left click and drag, so you can see a bit more of the shade editor. And I'll select on one of the objects, start with the cylinder. It could be any object for you, because yours might be a different position. And notice nothing appears down here, with no material on this object yet, so I'm going to add a new one here. And I'll just zoom out to show you what that looks like. The controls for this window are all navigated with the mouse button, so zooming in and out and moving around, holding it down. It's got what's called a principal BSD, a shader plugged into a material output. And you can combine lots of these shaders together into the material output, so you can add different effects to the object. The data looks very intimidating to start off with. If we zoom in, we can see there's a property at the top there called the base color. We'll start with that. So I'll click on the base color and see this move. I'll move this white dot up to the side of the circle. I'll increase the saturation, so you can see that number change drastically as I move in and out. So that's how colorful it is. If I move around the circle, that's the hue. So the hue value depends on which type of color it is, and the value is on the side here. So that's how bright or dark it is. So I'll make it really bright across the curves. And you can see it updating my viewport as long as you are either in material preview mode or rendered mode. We'll stay in rendered mode for now with Eevee as our render engine. So pause the video here, select an object, give it a new material, and change the base color to. So hopefully it's okay with that. Let's choose a different object now. I'll choose the monkey. Again, I'll create a new material. I'll change the base color to something like green. So across the green here, maybe a little dark. It's a simple version. And we can see once again, I'm updating on my monkey. Now you can see I've got material 002 written here. I can change the names just by clicking on this and changing it to green. And that's the enter. And if you press this drop down here, you can see the other material that I've created there. New base material that's automatically moved to the blender. So if I pick the purple now, you can see it changes to the purple 5%. And if I change the base color now, let's make it less saturated, both of my objects look fixed. So you have to think of these materials as if they're like a paint pot that's adaptable. If you edit the paint pot at all, it updates all the objects that it's painted on. So let's change this back to purple and call it purple. And with my monkey still selected, I can go back to my green under this panel here. So pause the video and catch up with me selecting a new object, giving it a new material, calling it green, and giving it that green color. Okay, hopefully you've gotten okay with that. Now what I would like you to do is select a different object that hasn't had a material palette to yet, and make it share one of the colours we've already created, so the green or purple. And I want you to change that colour very slightly and see that it updates on the objects. Of course, the video never opens. So by selecting my first sphere in the middle here, I can now come to this drop down here to choose the colours that I've already seen. I'll choose the green, and I'll come in to the green and keep that slightly, make it darker, perhaps less saturated. Then we can see that it's updated on both of those. So it's a quick challenge to you. I want you to add materials to the other objects, making sure that at least two of the new objects you are adding materials to share any material. Pause the video and go. Okay, so I'll go through the UV sphere, for example, add a new material, call it orange, and change the color to an orange color. Let's click on the torus, add a new material, I'll call it red, and go for the red. The tone right at the back there, add a new material, call it yellow, and maybe yellow. And lastly, hue, and it's the original object in sync that I now deleted, so it has the base material, which is white too. Let's name this white. And now all my objects have a material. Only two of the two share material at least. So I can change my hue to one of the materials we've already got. So I'll choose the yellow, and now we have two yellows and two greens in our scene. Now one thing you may not have thought of that has no material is the floor. Now let's choose the white so it's being used. Okay, so hopefully you got okay with that. Now you may notice it's not looking particularly wonderful. We can't really see the detail in my monkey here because the shadows from this light are very flat. Of course, across the cycles, we suddenly get a really nice looking image. We can even see some of the reflective quality of these materials, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. For now, let's jump back to VB and just try and make this look a little better. So what if I scroll down, there's something called ambient occlusion. When we tick that, you can suddenly see in the crevices of objects, particularly the monkey in this case, that there are some shadows. And I can come into this drop down, increase the distance with ambient occlusion, You can see it appearing in the crevices between my two objects as well. So if I bring this up to something like 1.5 meters, you can see that ambient occlusion in there in the gaps. And that's doing a lot better job of making it a bit more realistic. Let's go from the top again and change back the cycles. It naturally happens where the rays of light can't penetrate those tiny gaps. And the link of that effect is ambient occlusion. If we jump back to EV and turn on the ambient occlusion here, kind of place light bouncing in these crevices. So that's one thing we can do. That makes a lot of difference. Another thing, I scroll down a bit more, is screen space reflections. By doing that, you can suddenly see a bit of reflections in our objects. And I'll talk more about how to make them more reflective later on. Turning that on suddenly makes it look better with those tiny reflections. They're not actually realistic reflections, but they do a very good job. Reflections are quite costly in terms of rendering speed and time. So again, Evie tries to take all these things. And with both the ambient and the screen space reflections later on, we can have a much better looking render. Let's go to camera view with 0 to numpad. I'm going to zoom your camera in a little bit at this point and reposition it. Really certainly, if you hold down Control F button, you can zoom in smoothly rather than juddering by using blue light. To be a bit more precise. Okay, now I can render my image with F12. But again, it does it instantly. We've got this ambient occlusion in here and some reflections as well, which makes it look a lot better. Of course, if you're very proud of your work, you might want to save this image. I'm just going to worry about that. I'm just going to press this down. But do make sure you've saved this scene ready for next time.